so bright. Wow. How did everybody love the movie? Okay. So wonderful seeing it on the big screen.
That inspired your creation of this film was that idea of the fear and exhilaration of being a woman alone driving this country. I'd love to hear you talk a bit about that. Do you want to take this one?
So I, around 2015, I left LA and drove across country to Texas, and then spent a few years, I was working on another project called Ingrid in Oklahoma, and my husband was up in South Dakota working, he's a paleontologist, and so was up there on some dinosaur digs. And I was traveling between Oklahoma, Texas, and South Dakota for a few years on my own through numerous road trips. And yeah, the thought of a woman traveling alone was something that I wanted to make something about, but I wasn't sure exactly what that was going to be or what that meant. And yeah, something about the fear of being on the road alone, but also the exhilaration that comes along with that. Was something that I wanted, that I was feeling a lot, and so I wanted to try to make something about that. But ultimately, the film really came together once I started meeting the people in the film, and they kind of guided what that story, they really inspired me to actually make something, and sort of started to guide what that was going to be.
And you have these sort of docu-portraits of these people, Pam in particular, the diner waitress, so amazing. That's the waitress we all wish we had, I feel like. Can you talk a bit about how you crafted those portraits and how you integrated that with Lily?
Yeah, so I actually started with those before Lily was even attached. My editor and my cinematographer and I, we work in this sort of collaborative way where we're not really sure what we're making yet, but I might have some ideas and call them. Pam I was in this diner in Deadwood quite a few times. Pam was a waitress there, and we, like everyone else in this film, just sort of, I was there a lot. We became friends, and I mean, the film sort of speaks to who she is. I feel weird trying to describe her again, because she just was this epitome of someone who you walk in, she makes you smile, she loves her job. Everything about her as a human being sort of just made you started off your day smiling because of how much she also loved what she was doing. And then we became friends, and the idea that she could be who she really is in a film and how proud she was of her job, it was sort of her dream, and her parents got to see her in this, and she passed away during COVID, unfortunately, but I'm really glad that we were able to show her in this.
You also met Lainey, I believe, when you were getting your haircut. Yeah. And she became obviously a very integral part of this story. She's producer on it's her wedding. Yeah. That was her wedding. You're all guests at her wedding now. Can you talk a bit about working with her and crafting that part of the story?
Yeah, so Lainey was very integral from the beginning. I met her, I got my hair cut at a cost cutters in South Dakota, and her friend, I didn't know anybody, and her friend asked me to go out one night, or the night that I had gotten my hair cut, and I met Lainey that night, and that changed the whole trajectory of what I was doing with Unknown Country, because at that time, I had wanted to make a story about a young woman, but I wasn't really sure who that young woman was, or what, or just really anything about her. And Lainey and I became friends over a summer, and she sort of first suggested, like, well, have you thought about maybe making the young woman Native? Because I was talking about maybe including her and her family and trying to figure out how to include them in a larger way. And the idea that the main character could possibly be Native would also give them a larger sort of a part in the film. As I was getting closer to them, that was important to me. And And then as Lainey and I started to make this more of a reality, yeah, like we were talking one night, and she was like, well, I want to get married, like, could we throw my wedding in the movie? And and it was like over a few glasses of wine. I was like, I don't know what we're really making yet, so sure, maybe that can be the reason that the girl leaves. And that was kind of how we, it was just very fun, and we're actually just finishing a project about her young daughter, Jazzy, now that we've also been working on for a number of years. But yeah, and I saw Lily in Certain Women at the same time that Lainey and I were having these conversations. And when I saw Lily in Certain Women, I suddenly realized who Tana, or who the young woman was. And then I did everything that I could to get Lily on the project, because those two things just sort of, seeing Lily's performance in Certain Women, just suddenly I knew what I wanted to make, if that makes sense.
And through that, you, I believe Lily named the character Tana?
Yeah.
So how much of that conversation with Lily sort of crafted the journey, especially towards Texas?
Well, the end goal was always going to be Texas. Like, sort of what I had started with at the beginning was this concept of finding a photograph of a grandmother and then ending up in the same place as that photograph, because that's something that had happened to me, but was very anticlimactic when I actually went and stood in Texarkana, like on this line that my grandmother had stood on. But I loved the idea of what I was doing at that time, and I wanted to sort of amplify how magical that moment could be. And so Lily knew that concept. She knew the people. She'd seen the early footage of Lainey. She'd seen the early footage of the doc characters. And she herself was somebody that travels alone a lot, is from Montana, like knows the areas that I was in. So the project was already kind of quite familiar to her in some way before, she understood it on the same level I did, sort of like quite quickly. But yeah, then it was very collaborative, like creating Tana. Yeah, like that was the first day Lily came, like the first day we were filming. Yeah, she came to Spearfish and we sat, like thought of Tana's name, like sort of and through numerous conversations before we were filming, we just talked about more of who that character would be. And it was sort of a combination in a way, like Lily likes to call her Lily likes to call Tana like Lily adjacent, and Tana is also sort of me adjacent, so it was sort of like this combination that we came up with, from our backgrounds and who we are as people, and Lily was very integral to creating that character.
And a lot of this film is about sort of capturing a certain feeling of Americana, of specifically Midwest and Western Americana. As a child of my hometown is called Alturas, where the West still lives. This is a half a ghost town, if you ever want to go to a half a ghost town. It's in Northern California. And watching this film really felt like the West I know, the West I grew up in. And I know you're from California, so you also have that feeling. I'd love to hear a bit about the magic you see in the roads in the West. It's so empty and magical and mystical, and what you get from that feeling.
Sure. So yeah, I was raised in San Diego, and I went to school out on the East Coast. And before I had gone to Texas and done all these road trips for a while, I'd been to places in the middle, but I hadn't really spent a lot of time alone exploring and finding the beauty in all of these places. And when I'm had more experience on the East Coast, like my assumptions of I realized that there was so much of the country that I just didn't know, and I think just like driving in the Midwest and driving down these roads with these expanses of open landscape, it does it really affects you, because it's just you and there's no other cars, and there's landscape as far as you can see, and it's quite addictive once you start doing it, because to just sort of stay in your own thoughts and understand the country that we're from, and be part of the land in a way that we're not really on a daily basis, because we're on our phones and our computers. I highly recommend it to anybody.
There's not a lot of good service on some of these roads.
Which is also great, which, you know, like you actually are very disconnected.
You should have a Rand McNally with you just in case. So we talked a bit about Paris, Texas beforehand, and Wim Wenders and sort of his version of the West. He's from West Germany, comes to America, and it is not what he thought it was. It's not all New York. Could you talk a bit about how his work inspired this film, or the looks of the film?
Yeah, so while I was making the film and while I was sort of getting my initial ideas for the film, I was watching his road trilogy. I watched Paris, Texas quite often. I watched it a lot to just try to the way that he talked, or there was something about the way that he was making road movies that I just was we didn't have a script. And we were building it off of, we had a treatment, but, a lot of the inspiration was songs that I would listen to that are in the film, and on my road trips, and the people that I was meeting, and there was a sensibility that felt quite similar to his earlier work, and also just his process. I took a lot of photos for 3 years, 35mm photos on the road for years before we turned it into a film. And there was something about his process that was making me feel more confident in embarking on making this film. And I did try to teach myself how to make a road movie by watching a lot of his films. So.
The Road trilogy is one of my favorite trilogies. It should be always listed as one of the best trilogies. From the 70s, on Criterion. You were here last night when we handed out Criterions. We do not have Criterions. But I recommend getting the Wim Wenders Road trilogy with your own money.
Oh, and we shot, I meant to mention that, at Big Bend National Park. That's where the opening of Paris, Texas was shot at Big Bend National Park, and I liked the idea of that also being the end of a journey rather than the beginning. We didn't shoot in the same place in the park, but it's the same.
We also spoke a bit about the way you incorporate everyday people into this film is very similar to some of Agnes Varda's work. Could you talk a bit about what it is you love about her films and how you brought that sensibility into the film?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think I also come from an art background more so than a film background. So I think the things that she's inspired, she always talks about being inspired by people, and that being part of, or she would talk about being inspired by people and that sort of influencing the way that she would make her work, and just that blend of fiction and nonfiction, and not really knowing where that starts and ends in a lot of her films. And Vagabond also was an inspiration for us as far as also figuring out the edit. And yeah, I always felt, I always got some sort of confidence from her in talking about, and how she talked about people being really what drove her work. And that is what I felt with the people that Tana meets along the way in the Unknown Country. That if I wouldn't have met them, there wouldn't have been a movie. They really are what drove me to want to make the film.
Yeah, Pam says everybody has a story. I love the way you film people telling their stories. I think it's a lovely portrait of the kind of people I think often aren't, as you said, in films. But they are the backbone of America. They are who is, giving you your coffee when you're trying to drive for 8 hours with your cat in the car. Also recommend doing a road trip with your cat if you've never done that. You've never lived. The last thing I wanted to ask before we open up to audience questions is about the radio. One thing I loved about driving across the country was listening to local radio. I remember when I drove through Louisiana, there was French music on, and I was like, French music in America? Oh yeah, Louisiana. Of course there'd be French music. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on, you had both music and talk radio sort of interspersed, and news, and I'd love to hear about how you started.
So early on, probably in about 2015, I just took a Zoom recorder on my road trips, and I obsessively started recording the radio. I didn't really know why I was doing it at that time, so I have so many hours of radio. But yeah, I just was finding it. I was very interested in, as I moved through various places, just the different voices, the different concerns, even the weather was fascinating. Like I just fell in love with all various local radio from city to city and from town to town. So yeah, by about 2020, when we were editing this, or we were editing it along the way, but we didn't add in the radio till 2020, and Vanra, who also has a story by credit and is my editor and very close collaborator, I was like, we have to figure out the radio, and she was like, there's like 200 hours of radio. Like, how are we gonna sort of map this out or figure out? And so we went through and sort of organized, each town, each state, each topic, and sort of tried to build out almost like a different, sort of almost a script of the radio in a way so that it matched either, what Tana was going through emotionally, or, or a place, or, sort of had a point. But to Vanra's credit, that was a very hard layer to add on towards the end, and I'm really proud of what it is, because that's what I was sort of hoping.
Actually, I have a follow-up before we go to the audience. You mentioned weather, and it made me think about how I had to outdrive a storm in West Texas, and that was terrifying. Did you ever have inclement weather sort of while you were filming, and how did you deal with that?
Yeah, like the first scene in this, when Tana leaves the house, it was -30 that night, and at that point that was the very beginning of production, and it was just me, the DP, Lily, and I think the sound guys actually decided to not help at that moment, because they were like, it's -40, what is this movie, what are we doing? And yeah, I think it was just my husband and Andrew and Lily, and just, so it was pretty much always like that. It was -40 or -30, and then when we were trying to shoot spring scenes in South Dakota, there was like a May snowstorm. And then when we shot in Big Bend, it was 105. Like, we got all of it was not on purpose, but we got some of the worst weather. But that's also is South Dakota. Like, you don't know what weather you're going to get. And and I lived there half a year now, and it's still super fun. I just don't know.
May snowstorms are the West. That is, if you want to live in the West, you're going to have a May snowstorm, especially the Northwest. That's just, you just never put away your snow boots. Although Chicago, same thing, right? It rained today, so you never know. We do not have an audience mic, I'm very sorry. So if you have a question, please shout, and I'll try to see everyone's. Can you raise your hand? Anybody? No questions?
Nope.
Oh, somebody was raising a hand back there, yes.
With such an intuitive process, how do you switch from the sort of gathering of all these pieces into structuring it into something that is like a coherent piece?
That's a good question. It was quite hard. Firstly, Vanra, the editor, is incredible. Like, she, it's very much also the people you work with that make these projects possible. My cinematographer also, like, we're all quite connected, which definitely helps to have strength in a sort of chaotic process. But we we edited after every shoot, so we were building the story as we went, because we shot over a period of about 3 years, actually, 2018 to 2020, and that editing in between really helped to guide to know what we needed next, and if we needed to fill spaces, and if the story was working. And it also kind of helped for us to be, in a way, like on the journey with the film. So we kind of, I hope you kind of feel that when you watch it, like this excitement of we were also kind of waiting to see what would happen. But it definitely was very difficult. Like, it was, I don't know if we could all make something, like, we're doing something similar now, but with more structure than how we built The Unknown Country, because it was difficult. Does that answer your question?
I think right there in the center.
The Dallas sequence felt very organic, and I was just wondering if you also just happened upon that group of young people, the dance hall and the elderly dancer. How did that come?
So the group of friends is a mixture. They're all like my actual friends, but 2 of them are actors. Ray is actually in Quantum Leap, and a close friend. I'm very proud of him. And his other friend is also an actor and friend. And then the two others are friends of ours in Dallas. We've also spent a lot of time in Dallas, so I tried to put together a group of people that would also feel as organic, like friends of mine that would all get along. And then the dance hall scene, I knew we sort of needed to continue the meeting people the way that we had in the rest of the film in South Dakota. And I found this dance hall and this older woman, and I went. The sad thing was I tried to find a bunch of dance halls and there were hardly any left around Dallas. So that was one of the only ones that was left. But I met Flo when I went there, and it's sort of like much of the film just kind of fell into place in this quite, I hate using the word magical, but like it clicked. And Flo was kind of the perfect person to have as like the last story that we hear and to help Lily find that, grandmother moment. But then we shot it like over the course of one night. Like we shot that like 20, over the course of 8. Like we did all of it consecutively and created the night in the same way that we had created the rest of the movie, sort of like in all in order. So by the time they're out on the Ray and Lily are having that conversation by the car, it was like 6 a.m. Like we tried to keep the energy to feel like what it actually feels like to stay up for a whole night.
Yeah, right, kind of in front.
Yeah, I noticed on the credits that Neil Halstead contributed some of the music.
Yeah.
I was curious if you can about that.
Sure. I'm super excited about that. That was, Slow Dive is one of my favorite bands, and I listened to them a lot while I was road tripping, and used a lot of their songs as we were editing, and then when we started to need to get rights for songs, I reached out and wrote a letter of how obsessed I've been with Slow Dive for years, and and then this beautiful thing happened where I sent the imagery, I was a lot of their music sort of inspired the imagery, and then I was like, here's the imagery, is there any chance you guys feel inspired to write something, I don't know, sort of this full circle. And Neil got very excited about it, and so he wrote a couple of cues for the score in addition to us using the Slow Dive songs. But that was my favorite, that was a dream, that was a dream when you're obsessed with a band and then they feel inspired by your work, and then you never want to make anything again because you're just that was so perfect.
We have time for one more question. Okay. All the way in the back.
Yes?
Straight, all the way in the back? Yes.
Okay, well, such a cliche question, but I was wondering if there was one major influence that really shaped how you made the film. Because I just saw so many filmmakers in this, from the Ross brothers, Terrence Malick, Andrea Arnold, Deborah Gronick. So, is there any one particular influence that was driving the graphics?
It's probably the Menders. That's probably the one that I would say would be the driving force. But yeah, also she was saying Agnes Varda, Kiarostami. I watch love his films and love that blend of fiction and nonfiction. Those are probably my top 3. Yeah, Jonas Mika's Diaries. There's quite a few that, but more in that sort of avant-garde art film. I never know how to
Jonas Mika's is amazing. Now that you say it, I'm I see it.
Yeah, those diary
so
films. Good. Yeah, more from that would be where the inspiration for I mean also my dad's VHS tapes really inspired me of his travels and watching those as I grew up. So yeah,
I love that. Many of these films are on Criterion Channel, so just shout out to that. Thank you so much for talking to us about your beautiful film. Thank you for making this beautiful film. It made me feel like I was home, and that is always such a wonderful feeling. So I love this film.
Thank you so much, and thank you all for staying and giving me. Thank you.
Don't forget to vote.